Have you ever made an emote for Twitch and look back at it only to think, wow, I could have done better? That's how I feel about this. Yikes. My name is Jen, and I am a variety streamer on Twitch. I also taught myself how to draw digitally. I don't know how to use pen and paper. It's a thing. Today, I'm going to show you the tips and tricks that I learned over the last few years that helped me get from this emote to this one. Without any further ado, let's jump into it. So there are a lot of things that will make your life easier when you are making your emotes. Making sure that you have a clean setup is definitely one of them. I personally prefer using an emote grid, which is a larger canvas with lighter gray squares distributed along it. Each of the lighter squares are going to be 224 pixels by 224 pixels, which is double the typical size of a Twitch emote. I find that keeping the square smaller at 224 rather than say 3000 pixels will help me to not put too much detail into the emotes that won't be visible when they're sized down. It is also so important to use references when you are making your emotes, whether you are doing it for yourself or for a client. These emotes I did create for a client, so I made sure to put a mood board together, including 3 different types of each emote so that my client was able to pick out which style he preferred so that we were able to be more on the same page. This also helps to scale back on the edits that your client will ask you to make and is really nice to keep on the side while you are working. So the sketch is going to be probably one of the most important parts of creating your emotes, and it will also be the most time consuming. I use 2 sketch layers, one around 15 to 20% opacity and the other at about 50%. The lighter layer will be used to map out your base emote with some general and simplistic shapes, and the darker layer will be there for you to put most of your details. Personally, when I am doing my sketch, I do like to use the mechanical pencil tool with a purple color, but you can use any pen tool and whatever color you prefer. I do like to utilize the lasso and freeform tools. Those help me to move larger sections as well as resize emotes to better fit my square. It is important that we take up as much room as possible in that box and avoid leaving a lot of blank space that will make it harder to see your emote when it's shrunk down later. You will also notice that my sketch does stretch beyond the square, and I do this on purpose. I will add color to this area as well so that I am getting ready to export my emotes. I will be able to play around a little bit more about the orientation of where the emotes actually sit. If at all possible as well, I do like to try to take breaks when I am sketching out my emotes. This gives me the opportunity to come back with a fresh set of eyes and see some things that I might have missed while I was concentrating that look a little bit wonky. I do also like to send my sketches to a friend for the exact reason. Then they can spot anything that, again, I may have missed. Another good practice is also occasionally flipping your canvas to see if anything doesn't look quite right. So once my client has approved of my sketch, I move on to the line art process. This is the second longest process and definitely the most tedious, but at the end it is completely worth it. I do recommend locking your sketch layers in place so we don't move them accidentally. For the line art layer, I like to use a dark red color to differentiate from the purple sketch. I will use a turn-up pen with a good amount of stabilization. Instead of a raster layer, we are also going to be changing up to a vector layer. There is going to be a lot of advantages of using vector layers for your line art because they give you much more versatility in your work. At any point in the process, you can change any stroke that you have made. Each stroke can be individually transformed, or you can change the width of the stroke, and you can also use control points to smooth it out. So the vector eraser is going to be one of my favorite tools as well. This is going to give you the ability to slice a line in half, basically. If you have a line that intersects with another, you can actually just chop off the excess that you don't need, and this will give you a much cleaner, more uniform look to your emotes.
By default, each line is going to give you a lot of control points, so using the Simplify Vector Lines tool will help reduce the amount of control points that each line has to make it easier for you to manipulate into the shape that you want. For me, this is what takes up most of the time spent on the line art layer, because sometimes you just can't get the line exactly the way you want it and you need a little bit of help in order to manipulate your shapes. So when you are selecting your individual lines, you can also utilize your Shift key to select multiple lines at the same time. This comes in really handy for me because I like to make sure that my outer lines of the emotes are a lot thicker than the inner ones to make it easier for the emote to stand out when it's being used. I think for me, what makes an emote feel finished is the variation of line width. So on the inner areas, you're gonna have thinner lines that just feel a little bit more natural, and the outer areas that are going to be a little bit thicker to help stand off of the background. So once I'm happy with my line art, I am going to move up all of the emotes just slightly so that I can have a little bit more wiggle room with doing the coloring. To make the coloring process easier, we're going to use a mask layer, but in order to have that work properly for us, I'm going to add a line underneath all of the emotes just to close everything off so that we don't have any open gaps. So this is going to be where our overdrawing of the sketch layer comes in very handy. You're not actually going to see this line when it is done, so you don't need to be super precise about it. It doesn't need to be super clean. It's just going to be there to close everything off and make our fill tool work a little bit easier for us. So personally, I like to use a tool that was recommended to me from a TikTok. In the Clip Studio asset store, there is a creator named K96, and the image is going to be an ice cream cone colored pink and yellow. This is a miracle tool. It will color in all of your closed areas, which is why we did that line underneath everything. And then afterwards, we can go in and just use a clipping layer to color everything over, and we're not going to have any issues with anything being outside of our line art. So even though I have gone through everything with my client, there are still a couple of things that I will move around and change as far as the color scheme goes at this stage. This is going to be a really good time to kind of stamp everything in together. We are going to color our line art later that will be a little bit different as well. But I like to take this opportunity to double check with my client. He wanted white hair. I sent it to him. He didn't like it. So then we changed it again. And then we changed the color of the cat eventually as well. It's all very much a back and forth process, but having that mask layer is going to make everything so much easier for you. So like I mentioned earlier, having that vector layer is going to be super helpful because I am about to spot something on the ear that I don't like, and I'm going to move around a couple of control points before we move into the shading, except then I realized that I didn't do the pink on the ears, so we're also going to go back and do that. For the shading, I am also going to change this color a little bit after. What I do is I use two different layers. I have a shading layer and a highlights layer. Usually I put the shading on top of the highlights just for personal preference. I don't know why I didn't here. But what we'll do is we'll have the shading layer set to multiply and the highlights layer is going to be set to overlay. When you sample the base color of the emote, it is going to be a little bit darker, but that's totally fine because it will help the lines stand out more in a natural way. You're not having anything that is a super weird color as opposed to your different colors on the emote. It's also going to be really nice because instead of sitting there and tediously blurring everything, we are going to put a blur filter onto our shading and highlighting layer, and that will kind of just diffuse everything naturally for us. Saves us a lot of time. If you're not confident about how you do your shading and highlighting as well, this is also going to be a really great time to have your reference images up, and that way you can kind of use those as a helpful tool to where you should be adding the different highlights and contours. Okay, I think this is my favorite part about doing the emotes. It just ties everything together. What we're gonna do is we're gonna create a clipping layer on top of our liner layer. I colored mine black here because most of my lines are going to be black, and then I go through and I match up a little bit of the different lines on the emote to the area that they are surrounding, and it just changes everything and it makes it look a little bit more clean. And then I go through and I make it about a 65% opacity, and it just really helps tie everything together and make it look a lot more clean. And then after we add our color to the eyes, we're gonna add a layer on top of that, and we're gonna add in our eye highlights to all of the emotes, and we're gonna move into saving. So we are going to make a new canvas. We are going to change this to 224 by 224. This is going to be the perfect size for our little squares that we made. Usually I select not to put a paper layer. You want to make sure that you don't have anything on the back. You're going to have that little checkered pattern just so that you're able to see behind the emote and it's transparent. While we are doing this, I do want to mention, because I don't think I did earlier, I did put everything into a folder. The only layer that isn't in the folder is going to be your grid layer. And then that way, when we lasso everything together here, we're going to be able to grab the entire emote, sketch included. That way, if we need to come back to it and change something for the client, then it's a little bit easier and we have all of our references and everything like that were originally available to us. The number one reason I like to do this is I actually like to do fun holiday edits for my emotes, and this will make it a whole lot easier to go in and just change what I need to instead of redrawing the entire emote. So this is going to be where we're playing around a little bit with the orientation of the emote, just to double check where exactly we want everything to sit. I will zoom out as well just to make sure that it looks okay and everything is able to be seen when it is smaller, because the emote is actually going to be super tiny when it's actually in use. You want to make sure that you're still able to see what the emote is supposed to be. And then I'm going to make sure that I save the Clip Studio file version as well as the PNG. I actually use a third-party site to resize my emotes. It just makes it a whole lot easier. It'll have everything in the files that you need it to, and you can drag everything all over at once and it'll have everything done automatically.
That's it. That's all of my tips and tricks for you. I hope that you were able to learn something today, because I know that I would have loved to have a video like this when I was still drawing things like this. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you around.